In this episode, we'll take a look at the iRig Pro Quattro I. First up, this is being recorded from my own perspective. I record mostly spoken word dialogue for podcasts, video, things like that. So if you are a musician and you're looking for a bunch of samples with different instruments, I'm sorry, I don't have that here for you. I don't want to waste your time. You are dismissed. Oh, by the way, I'm recording this entire thing with the iRig Pro Quattro I. It's coming over here into my iPad, which has a USB-C input. This is the iPad Pro. You could record it just as well on a phone or anything else. I'm using a Road Rec app here in this particular case, but there are lots of other apps you could record with. And the microphone that I'm feeding into the Quattro Pro is the Neumann U87 AI. Now, what is this thing? First of all, well, it's a USB audio interface for PC, Mac, iOS, and Android. It is also a standalone mixer, so if you just want to use it as a mixer, you can do that as well. And it also can act as an audio adapter or maybe a mixer for cameras as well. So it can serve a variety of different purposes. What it is not a standalone recorder. It does not have any sort of recording media in it. It has inputs to bring microphones and instruments and line level sources in from a variety of different things. So from mixers, from microphones, from instruments, and then has a variety of outputs, including USB, that can connect to, again, a PC, a Mac, an iOS or Android device, and record to those. So those devices are going to do the recording, and the Quattro I is going to act as your interface. It also has XLR outputs and unbalanced outputs, so if you want to send this off to another recorder, you could do that as well, or even to a PA system. So who is this company, IK Multimedia? Well, they are a company that makes a lot of things for musicians. They make mobile audio interfaces like this. They make software synths. They make samples. They make effect pedals. Again, lots of things for musicians. Why did I choose to review this? 3 reasons. Number 1, it has a limiter. When you're recording spoken word, one of the biggest challenges is you can set the gain. You can ride the gain if you need to. If people get a little bit louder, you can pull the gain down a little bit so that it doesn't go up against 0 dB and distort. But a limiter is a really useful tool, so if things suddenly get louder than you had anticipated, this will actually pull those levels down before they distort. So that's the idea. We'll test that out. Number 2, there aren't really a lot of camera adapters anymore where you can take an XLR microphone and get it into your camera that has a 3.5 millimeter input, except for the proprietary ones, like Panasonic has one for their cameras called the XLR1. I think Sony has some for their cameras, depending on which camera you're using. But aside from that, there aren't really a lot of third-party adapters anymore. Things like, I haven't seen a Beach Tech in years, and there were other companies making those as well. So it's kind of nice to see another option available on the market. And overall, this is what I really kind of consider an audio problem solver kind of tool, all in one. And so it's just kind of an interesting device from my standpoint for $350 US. Okay. First up, again, I said this works with iOS, Android, Mac, PC, as well as standalone as a mixer on its own. It records in 24-bit up to 96 kilohertz. It can record in mono, stereo, and it also has a multi-track mode. So if you're going to be recording into a Mac or PC, you can record each of the 4 inputs independently. It also has one 3.5 millimeter line input and 2 RCA line inputs, both unbalanced, of course. And then, of course, 4 balanced XLR inputs. 2 of those double as instrument inputs, and the other 2 double as balanced line level inputs. Interestingly, I didn't think I'd be excited about this, but it does have a built-in MEMS microphone. If you're not familiar with what that is, most phones, for example, use this kind of microphone. It's basically a microphone on a little circuit board that has all of its own processing, so it converts it immediately to digital, and this one sounds surprisingly good.
Okay, this is testing the iRig Pro going into my iPhone XS, and we are recording from this cool little device using its own mic.
There's, of course, a 3.5 millimeter headphone output, and it sounds surprisingly good and can drive even 250 ohm headphones without a problem. There's a little bit of hiss in there once you have to push it a little bit harder for those higher impedance headphones, but it can still drive them, and it actually sounds quite good. You can power this 3 different ways with a DC barrel input here. It does not come with that power adapter unless you get the deluxe kit, which is $100 more, and includes some other things, including a stereo pair of microphones. Or you can power it via USB input. It has a USB micro input. So for example, in this case, I'm powering it with a USB battery bank. It also has a slot for 4 AA batteries. And so of course you can power it via those as well. And you can power it from the devices that you connect it to via USB. So lots of different options for powering. So let's run through what I would consider the pros. I've already talked about all of the different inputs that it has. That's amazing on a little device like this. Another thing that I think is really important is that the mic preamps to my ear sound quite good. They have a little bit of a warm sound to them, so they're not perfectly neutral, I wouldn't say. They have a little bit of warmth, and I think that really kind of shows IK Multimedia's DNA, where they're really trying to cater to musicians primarily. They'd love to have other people use their devices, I'm sure, but they did add what sounds to me like a little bit of warmth to that preamp, which is a nice sound. Okay, as I mentioned, the 2 inputs on the top, inputs 1 and 2, are mic or instrument inputs. So if you use a 1/4-inch input, it becomes an instrument input. XLR, it's for microphones. And for those 2 inputs, you can turn on a limiter. I did some testing with the limiter, and it turns out that from what I can tell, it's a digital limiter, and it doesn't really help in terms of preventing clipping.
Now I am talking really, really loud, and wow, that is a nasty
at the input, because what happens is the audio comes in, it gets converted, and then the limiter kicks in, from what I can tell, which means that if something does get suddenly louder than you expected, it's still going to clip. So it doesn't really do a whole lot for you, except make things in post a little bit easier if you aren't getting all the way up to 0 dB. It's just going to kind of manage some of those transients a little bit. So not super useful, a little bit disappointing. Then inputs 3 and 4 can also be used for microphones. You can apply phantom power. You have 2 switches for phantom power, one for channels 1 and 2, and a separate one for channels 3 and 4. So it's not completely independent, but you do have essentially 2 banks of phantom power. Inputs 3 and 4 are also line inputs. So you can drive either a microphone into there or a line level signal. And those line level signals can be balanced on the 1/4-inch combination input, or there are also 2 RCA inputs, unbalanced, and then a 3.5 millimeter stereo input, again, unbalanced, but also can be on tracks 3 and 4. So you have a lot of flexibility there, and that's really, to a large extent, why I would describe this as kind of an audio problem-solving kind of tool, or kind of like a miniature mixer with a lot of different inputs and outputs. We did do a little test to make sure that we could drive a very gain-hungry microphone like the Shure SM7B, and when I turned the input gain to max, 10 out of 10, seemed like it worked okay. Overall, I would say, looking at the waveform right now, I'd say yes. There are also 2 XLR line level outputs, so if you want to run those into maybe another recorder, into another mixing board, you can do that. And there is also a 3.5 millimeter line output, so it's a stereo output, again, unbalanced, but you can get that out to something else if you need to do that. For example, you could send it directly into a phone, although I'm not sure why you'd do that. You could always just go in via USB to a phone. So there are just lots of different options. I don't think there are a lot of circumstances where this wouldn't work in one way or another. Those 2 RCA inputs, for example, really great if you need to record from a mixing board. So for example, if you're a wedding videographer, pretty nice use case there. Or if you needed to just bring in a whole bunch of other mics, and then your mixer, for whatever reason, didn't have any sort of USB converter, this could take care of that for you. If you haven't noticed already, there's no LED screen, no LCD screen, nothing with menus. You just control all of it with switches and dials, which maybe some people will be disappointed about that. For me, that makes it really simple to use. I really actually quite like that. So if you do need to do a bunch of other more in-depth settings, of course, you would do that on the recording device. So whether that's going to be a Mac PC, whatever you're using, that's where you would do those other things. And in fact, for example, it does not have a high-pass filter built into it. You would apply that on the recording device itself. So maybe a little bit of a downside, but also keeps it super simple on the unit itself. It does have a direct monitoring feature. So if you want to monitor exactly what's coming in without sending it to the USB device and back from the USB device to monitor it, you can actually just direct monitor it and hear exactly what's coming in at the device itself. So very useful. There is also a loopback feature. So if you are connected to a device that's playing back, say for example, maybe some music and then you're playing along to it, if you were doing that, or even if you're doing a podcast, you could bring in an audio sample from your computer or phone, and that could be part of what's being recorded as well with that loopback feature. So another nice feature there. On the unit, there are 5-segment LED meters. That's pretty useful. Just makes it easy to get your levels set and make sure that things are coming in at reasonable levels and not clipping. In terms of powering, this is a fairly power efficient unit. What I found is with 4 AA nickel metal hydride batteries, these are the IKEA batteries, I was able to power this with 1 microphone connected, phantom power turned on for 4 hours and 29 minutes. So pretty decent battery time as well. Now, as part of the deluxe kit, or I think you can buy them aftermarket as well, there is a pair of XLR stereo microphones. So if you wanted to add the ability to capture in stereo, that's an option here as well. Now, in that deluxe kit, you get the 2 stereo microphones, a stereo pair, plus you get a little storage bag, and you get the DC adapter. So if you wanted to power that as well. So that seems like a reasonable add-on for $100 if those devices are important to you. Now, there's a removable plate that has a 1/4-20 attachment point with threads. So that's useful if you want to mount it on top of a camera or onto some sort of stand. That is how you would go about doing that. And I think the thing that's nice about it, I don't know if they sell that independently. I would hope they do. But if that ever gets messed up somehow, maybe damaged in some way, it could be replaced, which is kind of nice. The unit does come with a 2-year warranty, and it runs $350 US for the basic kit, which is what we have here. And it runs $450 for the premium kit, which includes the 2 XLR stereo pair microphones, plus the DC adapter, plus a storage bag. So that's what you're looking at in terms of overall cost. Now, there are some cons. First of all, what's interesting is that the connector to attach this to your recording device, whether, again, that be a Windows machine, Mac, iOS, or Android, is proprietary on the Quattro side. So you have to use their cables. You can't just use any cable, which I thought was a downside. If one of these cables gets damaged, you either have to go back to IK Multimedia to buy another one, or you're out of luck. You can't just buy your own or bring your own USB cable. So it seemed like a little bit of a downside. On the plus side with that, it fits in pretty firmly. It's not the kind of thing that'll pull out super easily. It doesn't lock necessarily, but it does have a nice firm connection, at least when it's new. So see how that holds up over time. The USB port for powering is USB micro. I don't know why in 2022 it's not USB-C. Maybe it has something to do with the global supply issues that we're up against in 2022. I don't know, but I would really prefer to see USB-C at this point. I had to go searching through my big drawer of cables to find a USB micro cable that I could connect to the battery bank. The power switch is interesting. It's a 3-way switch. It's an off, battery power, or USB power. At first, I was a little confused by that. I thought, oh, if I want to power by a USB battery bank, I just switch it to USB. No, that's not the case. That's to power it from the USB device that you're connected to and that you're recording with. And if you want to record via the USB battery, you set it to the middle setting, which is the battery setting. Tripped me up a little bit at first. Not a big deal once you get it sorted out, but just something to keep in mind. Overall, the build quality is very plasticky. There is very little metal on this thing. And for those of you that are familiar with them, that's kind of this new well, I don't know if it's not really new at this point, but I guess it's sort of a rubberized plastic. It feels like, for those of you that are familiar with like the Zoom H6, I think it feels sort of like that. Not my favorite plastic. It's better than a really, really hard, brittle plastic. I think the thing that concerns me the most are the switches. They just don't feel super solid. The dials are actually quite nice. I like them, but the switches seemed a little bit delicate to me, so I'm not sure how well those will hold up over time. The 1/4-20 thread adapter that slides on it has metal threads, but it's inset in plastic, and so that seems like the kind of thing that may not hold up super well over time, especially if it gets abused in any way. Nice thing is it is replaceable, in theory at least. It's certainly removable, so maybe that balances out. I don't know. We'll see how it holds up over time. As I mentioned before, there's no high-pass filter built into the unit itself. You use the recording device to apply that, so it's going to be a digital high-pass filter. And at $350, that's generally what you're going to be looking at anyway, so I'm not surprised by that, just something to know. And finally, the self-noise came in at minus 61.73 dB RMS max when we set the input level to max, put a little dummy XLR adapter on there with a 150 ohm resistor across pins 2 and 3. You might ask yourself, what are you talking about? I have no idea what you mean by any of this. It's kind of a technical way to measure the self-noise of the microphone preamplifier. What I will say is that that is not the best result I've heard in a long, long time. It's okay. It's not bad, but it's not the very best. So just to put it into context, the Zoom H8, the kind of handy recorder with 6 inputs on it, or 6 XLR inputs on it, is actually 3 dB quieter in terms of self-noise. So not the cleanest preamps in the world, but to balance that out, I actually feel like the Quattro I preamps, again, have that kind of warmer sound to them. So it's a little bit of a trade-off there. I think in terms of overall self-noise, it's completely usable. You're just going to need to be aware of that and use microphones that don't have a lot of self-noise. In fact, it's probably your microphones you need to worry about more that have more self-noise. So overall, what are my impressions? This is an interesting device. I'm not entirely sure what to make of it. I like the fact that it's really versatile because it is essentially a little tiny mixer, and it can solve a lot of problems. But if I want something that's small and I don't have to tether it to another device to get the recording, like even a mobile phone, if I'm going to be out in the field recording all day long, the Zoom H series handy recorders kind of make more sense to me. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Number two, if I really want, if a limiter is really important to me, I'm doing a lot of spoken word, maybe voiceover work on the go, I would actually think that the CEntrance Portcaster, with its metal build, with its cleaner preamps, and they're substantially cleaner in that case, it also has really nice analog limiters and the ability to record to micro SD cards built into it. To me, that makes more sense. It doesn't have as many inputs, but it does beat it out in terms of build quality and all those other features. So there's just lots and lots of trade-offs. So there's an overall look at the Quattro I. I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. And if you have not already subscribed, make sure you do that. And we'll be sure to get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk to you soon.